So I'm Erin Broadwin. I'm a health tech reporter at Axios. I'm here with a bunch of experts who are going to talk to me about venture capital investing in healthcare. And I'll have each of them introduce themselves briefly. But before I do that, I just want to start with a little observation and an opening question, perhaps. So I was sitting in my hotel room earlier today, and I was thinking that in terms of AI in healthcare, I feel like I'm seeing a little bit of a parallel of what we saw in terms of activity with digital health venture capital investment. In terms of 2020, 2021 being gangbusters in terms of activity, tons of money flying everywhere, lots of ideas thrown around, lots of investment happening, and then a little bit of a right-sizing, coming back down to normal, valuations potentially right-sizing as well. And I feel like we're seeing that with AI too. I mean, I remember back in the day reporting on how, usually reporting on how AI was not going to take doctors' jobs, but the idea back then was AI was this huge thing. It was going to, deliver the world in healthcare, complete with taking over doctors' jobs. And I feel like it's right-sized a bit. We're now talking about more practical applications of AI in healthcare. And so hopefully we're going to talk about some of those today, but lots of other things as well. Don't worry, it won't be just AI. So in a market where AI is overhyped and most likely overfunded, I want to hear from each of you what couple of concepts, could be one, could be three, perhaps, that catch your attention as underappreciated investment opportunities. And don't forget to introduce yourself real quick.
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dina Shacker. I'm a general partner at Lux Capital. We're a multi-stage venture firm, and we do all sorts of sectors, but healthcare tends to be where I spend most of my time. So we'll dive into the overhypedness of it all, but there are some really interesting applications that we're seeing in healthcare. And for me, I get excited about sort of the non-sexy picks and shovels. We all know that there are so many opportunities in healthcare to simply reduce paperwork, to make things more efficient. And as unsexy as it is, I think there's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity there. So things like prior auth, specialty pharma, and of course, documentation and billing, where we're seeing a lot happening, particularly on the voice transcription side.
And do you see promise in each of those things as an individual company, or do you see a world in which that all is handled by perhaps one entity at some point?
I think it might, well, in healthcare, we always have to deal with the behemoths, which are the EHRs, and I know they are trying to take on some of these. I think there is an opportunity for standalone companies in each of these categories, but I also have seen these categories be product features in other companies. In fact, I have a company called Waymark that's in the Medicaid space, which is leveraging community health workers to deliver care, and yet they have one of the coolest applications that I've seen of AI, both on the prior auth side, they've just built it in-house, as well as a prediction tool where they can predict with high 90% accuracy ED admissions. So I think there's also a ton of opportunity even for care delivery companies to leverage AI, but we haven't really cracked the nut yet on these really large standalone companies.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, I'm Navid Farzad. I'm with Frisk Cressy Ventures. We are based in Nashville and have an office also in New York. All we do is healthcare. We were founded by former Senator and Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and Brian Cressy, who's been investing in healthcare, in venture and growth, and buyouts for almost 50 years. He doesn't like to hear that, but it's just math. We invest in early stage companies as early as it gets, including at times we will, when things align, incubate companies. And everything we do, sometimes easier to say what we don't do, which is we don't invest in anything with end markets in life sciences, pharma, med tech, and that side of healthcare. I like to tell people I'd probably be better off investing in oil and gas or something because it's quite different. In terms of, I'll stick with AI. It's hard to not talk about it as much as we're in many ways fatigued in hearing it. It's used everywhere, but in many ways, I think it's warranted. One of the things we've been thinking a lot about is beyond the applications or application layer. How are we going to really know if it's safe once these applications get deployed, and in particular on the health system side, where it's not just pure admin or rev cycle or something where you're not going to harm patients. It's harder to do that. I guess anything's possible, but how are we going to know when, by definition, these things are not going to be static, right? And they're tremendously powerful. And so we've been thinking through that, is how do you have like a security monitoring kind of surveillance layer once things get deployed. And that highway goes right to Washington in terms of regulatory, which I don't know, I'm kind of coming to a conclusion where if anybody today tells you they know what's going to happen and how it gets regulated, I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Holly Maloney. I'm a managing director at General Catalyst. We are a full stack venture capital firm. So we invest in businesses and founders at the ideation phase all the way through pre-IPO and everything in between. We have about 30 billion in assets under management. We are a global firm. And about 25% of our work has been in healthcare. Everything is centered around our health assurance thesis, and we invest in software, data platforms, AI-centric companies, innovative care delivery models, and then up to 20% of our work will be in higher risk therapeutics and research tools and software platforms selling into that industry. I co-run our healthcare investing work. And so I totally agree with the ideas that you all have shared in terms of what's interesting in AI. As I think about a couple of different things that we're excited about that maybe are less, mainstream, one would be just uncovering new data sets that can help us fundamentally underwrite different areas of risk in a new way. So you actually might see net new insurance products or an entire sort of reimagination of an insurance category that is leveraging first of their kind data sets that have been unstructured. We figure out a way how to actually structure those and use them and create real proprietary advantage, because these are first of their kind, unique and proprietary data sets. So that's one thing that I would mention. The other thing is the reason why healthcare is of such interest from a generative AI perspective is because it is one of the most labor-intensive industries that we have in our country. There are about 18 million people employed by healthcare, and it's actually one of the only mature industries that has regressed from a productivity perspective over the last generation. And so there is an abundant swath of opportunities in terms of how you can help crack what is a workforce crisis. We need to see workforce transformation. And so we have been building companies like Hippocratic AI that are an agent that can supercharge the nursing workforce and allow them to practice at the top of their license. They've built a foundational model that can interact with and communicate discrete non-clinical activities that are of super high value to health systems and insurers.
Yeah. What do you mean by regressed productivity in terms of the workforce, just putting out, committing more hours and putting out less? Yeah, I mean, just as the administrative burden put on health systems has, I don't know what the multiplier is, but it is significant. And growing up, my mom was actually a nurse. She worked nights in the cardiac unit, and she was the manager of her floor. And so I saw that firsthand. She would technically work from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., but never got home until like 10 a.m. because of literally the manual scheduling input from a data perspective that she and her team had to go through, and it was crippling, actually. Yeah. Navid, you mentioned safety. What are some of the things you all do to run due diligence on companies that are claiming the world with AI, or perhaps even claiming more practical aspects? If they touch patient care, even if they're just doing revenue cycle management, there are significant concerns in terms of inflated ideas, promises, concepts. What are you doing to make sure that this stuff is real?
Well, short answer to that right now is nothing, because we're not really. The world in this category that we're talking about is moving so quickly that by the time you think you understand it, you've got to understand it again. And the rapid pace of innovation and adoption and what's happening out there, I think as an investor, we haven't, first of all, I think just from a regulatory perspective, there's so much uncertainty, like I was saying earlier, and we're as close as anybody. I work with a former Senate Majority Leader, so we're as close as anybody to those regulations, but I think everyone's still trying to figure it out. And I mean, it is, I think about all the time I've spent in healthcare and most of that in investing, there's not, with all that uncertainty, I think if we do what we do, it's fun to try to like figure that out. Because at the end of the day, like at the end of the rainbow, if we do things right and we are smart about regulating things, and there's always going to be bad actors, there's always going to be bad things that happen, we have tremendous opportunity. I mean, it's hard to, I was thinking about this the other day, and we're talking about an industry where we still send billions of faxes. And then we're talking about automating patient care, and it's like, those two things are so polar opposite.
Faxes, phone calls.
And yeah. So anyway, I say that to say there's tremendous opportunity. I think there's tons of pitfalls. You mentioned, are there going to be these point solutions that are adopted broadly and people have like 30 of them? I don't think so. But does that mean everything's going to be on one platform? I don't think so either. But we're just trying to kind of understand it. So we haven't done that level of due diligence to really get into the clinical, whether these LLMs are dictating things that are right or wrong.
Yeah. One analogy I just threw out there that we've talked about internally is sort of thinking about the automotive industry. How are cars built and tested obsessively, right? I mean, because you're never going to put an automobile out on the street that is unsafe, yet, lives are counting, well, in theory, but lives are counting on the production of and the fact that they were made with good intent. And so we like to think about the training of these models and using AI in that, like, build and iterate, build and test in that just like continuous testing motion, because there are human lives on the other side, and so it's of critical importance. And just also dovetailing on your comment around the faxing going on. So I actually think in healthcare there could be a chance that we actually leapfrog the SaaSification of an industry. Like, yes, of course, there is software as a service in healthcare, but not nearly as penetrated as almost any other industry that we've seen. And so you actually may leapfrog from fax to Gen AI in a way that you won't see it almost anywhere else.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes they go hand in hand. I don't know if you all remember one of the first big announcements that was made around AI in healthcare was Doximity. Mm-hmm. Yep. And if you read the press release, I think you might have reported on it actually, if I recall. But Doximity's press release literally had the word fax machine and ChatGPT in the same sentence, and that is healthcare. That's health tech as we know it.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing you said that we've thought about as well is, where is the bar going to be with respect to AI in terms as you get closer and closer to patient care? Because there's plenty of errors being made today with humans, right? So does it have to be perfect? It's not going to be perfect, but is it 90%? Is it 99%? Is it, because the status quo is certainly not 100, right? And so we can definitely be better. We could talk for several hours about AI here.
Yeah, I promised the whole thing wouldn't be about AI though. So, on that note, you mentioned interventions and what they're being measured against, and that brought to mind one area of focus that is of renewed buzz lately, which is MSK, or musculoskeletal care, physical therapy, virtual hybrid physical therapy. There have been some questions raised about a recent report, not about the report itself, but the report raised interesting questions about the industry of MSK, the industry. They also did a report, PHTI, the Peterson Health Technology Institute, also did a report on digital diabetes care. And one of the central questions in both reports was kind of, what is this being compared against? What is this virtual treatment being compared against? Is it being compared against in-person traditional care? If that in-person traditional care is the comparator, is it with a coach? Is it with a physical therapist? Who is it? And I wanted to talk about MSK anyway, because a certain company recently raised a lot of money, and because it's been in this report making headlines. And I wanted to ask you all a perhaps controversial, maybe not at all question. Why should we care about digital health interventions like these promising MSK tools? Because, as the report concluded, they were very promising. If, as the report also concluded, they lack really concrete integrations into the healthcare system at large. And what that can mean is that patient uptake, for example, is really low. Like, for example, I'm currently pregnant and have been seeking physical therapy for some things I've never sought it for. When I was in pain, each of my moments of crises, I don't think about going to my employer. I think about going to my healthcare provider. And I wonder what you all think about how we can address that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. Well, I mean, the work that Peterson is doing is incredible. It's really just introducing, parents transparency and just a sort of a common fabric of how we assess, kind of quality and outcomes. And what I did love about that report is, the outcomes that we are seeing and the cost reduction that we are seeing from some of these MSK platforms like Sword, which is one of our portfolio companies that has done tremendous work innovating from a technology perspective. So that is all really encouraging. And so now it's like, okay, so what do we do to really expand access of that and make sure that the people who need it most understand what a platform like Sword is and how to access it, and how the convenience of this kind of treatment in your home may be amazing for folks. But really what companies like Sword are focused on are developing really high quality partnerships, right? So what they do is enabling MSK virtually in the home in a unique way, leveraging technology so that it's really easy to use and easy to understand, and really can drive better engagement with a program for the duration of the program because of the way in which they have engagement modalities. But the reality is, to your point, it doesn't work for everyone. And so what they've built out and are now delivering through MA is a partnership with physical providers so that you can have the best of both worlds. If you want to go in person, they can still be that sort of digital advocate to drive you to do what you need to do at home. Because who likes to do physical therapy exercises at home? They give you that sheet, you look at the sheet and you're like, okay, great, thanks. I'm just gonna hope that whenever I go in person, I'm gonna get the outcomes that I need. But Sword has an amazing way of driving behavior change. Behavior change is so hard, and they have just obsessed over this concept of how you use technology to drive behavior change. So, I think it's partnerships like that that can help bridge the gap and have that whole person care model for everyone.
As part of the partnerships, is the provider then the same? Because I was speaking with somebody about this the other day, and they were saying, ultimately, it doesn't matter. This is just one person's opinion, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the provider needs to be the same provider, the in-person and the virtual. How do they address that?
Yeah, so the sort of provider of record is the one that is in person, and so the program that's being delivered isn't by an actual provider, it's through technology, through nudges, through kind of async modalities. So the provider of record would be the one that's in person, but at the end of the day, it's up to the patient. The only way a patient is actually going to go through an entire episode of care is if they're receiving that care from who they want to receive it and how they want to receive it.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm going to jump in.
No, go ahead.
I think part of what you were saying is also that it's just, I've been in healthcare for 25 years, and every time I have to navigate it, I take a step back and this is so hard, and way harder than it needs to be, and there's really no excuse for it to not be better, is my personal belief, and I hope I'm more right than wrong. And I think one of the things you were getting at is and we've invested in at least probably 5, 6 single specialty kind of verticals like MSK and GI and others. But they're all siloed, and you need a navigation layer or a quarterback or whatever analogy you want to use that helps patients get to these solutions that are right for them and at the right time. And it's just really not there unless, and really broad strokes, and everyone in this room, we've got means and, we just understand it or have access to certain things that it's way easier for us, but, the world out there, it's very hard, if not impossible, and you're just leaving it up to chance that you get to the right provider at the right time that thinks about the right thing and tells you about Sword. There's so much room for improvement.
Yeah, I was just going to add, going back to sort of how you framed the question, I think I agree with Holly. These studies are critical right now. And the fact of the matter is we are now in the next sort of generation of digital health transformation, right? There have been many generations, but let's just say, there was a big moment during COVID where really just putting everything online, virtualizing the experience was frankly revolutionary enough. And we know telehealth existed long before COVID, but that was a big moment. But now, we're here in person, visits are back in person, and all these companies are sort of grappling with what does this mean. But you have enough of an N, you have enough sort of longitudinal data and hopefully enough kind of volume of data to actually show that these digital interventions can, or in some cases cannot, do better. So one example, Holly and I are both on the board of a company called Maven Clinic in the women's health space, which originally started off direct to consumer, eventually went to employer, now they're working with large payers. But through the sort of broadening of their patient base, they were able to actually show clinical outcome improvements. They were able to prove that their virtual prenatal care platform could reduce C-section admissions, reduce NICU admissions. They recently published a paper showing the outcomes associated with virtual doulas. And that's, I think, where we start to get really excited and where these become not just like tech tools that are cool because they're digital, but actually critical tools for the big stakeholders in healthcare, the payers, and the health systems.
You know, I'm going to ask, were these white papers or peer-reviewed papers?
One of them was peer-reviewed. I believe, was it JAMA or Nature, I think, that the virtual doula one came out in. But yeah, they were peer-reviewed.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you've been at it for a couple of years, it takes time, and you don't have those outcomes that you asked about diligence, and we would do a tremendous amount of diligence there. That's not AI, but where it's like cost and quality,
Yep.
and really the experience that we haven't talked about. You know, we started talking about NPS whenever that was in healthcare, and before that, people didn't even know what that meant. Mm-hmm. I'm of the belief that we should set the bar high and say we should delight the patient in every one of our companies, like delight them, which I don't know what the word is I'd use, but it's not even above the waterline of positive. It's absolutely negative. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic. Sometimes overly optimistic, but I'm optimistic.
It's part of the job description.
Yeah,
We're definitely in a way of consumer empowerment in healthcare. It's expected, it's required, and it certainly is a laggard as we think about any other consumer-oriented.
But I would also add the provider as the consumer. That's a big part of it as well, right? So making the experience better for patients, but you can't do that without making the experience better for providers, as Holly was alluding to in terms of nurse and the healthcare worker issues that we're dealing with across the board.
Right. I've seen a lot of people say that you need 3 main ingredients for any success in health tech. There's 3 things. I'm sure they're not going to surprise any of you, but I want to hear whether you agree, disagree, your takes. Payer coverage, investor interest, patient demand. Which of the 3 is most important? Do you disagree with any of them? Talk to me.
What were they again?
Payer coverage, investor interest, patient demand.
I mean, the reality is if you crack the code on number 1 and number 3, you may never have to raise $1. And so it depends on what you mean from by investor interest. But you know, in healthcare, we always talk about sort of these flywheels that need to be built because it is so hard. Whatever you can do to really activate your go-to-market strategy and your patient acquisition strategy. And so, you know, there's a lot that you can learn out of the gates before you have full payer coverage, but the reality is that there may potentially be a ceiling on access and a ceiling on the volume of patients that you can acquire if you don't have really broad payer coverage. But that, you know, that comes with delivering really high quality experiences. So it may not be you know, the first thing that you see, but I think it's absolutely critical. And sorry, the third one was
Payer coverage, investor interest, patient demand.
patient demand.
I mean, I think there's a whole suite of companies that don't necessarily fall in that category. Maybe they don't work with payers at all. And, you know, there are public companies like HIMSS who are doing, you know, relative to other companies in the space doing quite well without any payer coverage, where they're focused on D2C. And there are companies that, you know, are not necessarily related to patient demand that are also doing well. So I don't necessarily think it's even necessarily one of those 3, although that sounds like a nice combination to have, and you can certainly have a very unsuccessful company with all 3 of those things as well.
It just depends on what your strategy is as an investor, and you know, what is the thesis that you're supporting? You know, what are you communicating to your limited partners or the companies that you're focused on building? You know, at General Catalyst, around our health assurance thesis, you know, health equity is a really core component, and so we today, as we've sort of matured our investing philosophy, have really struggled investing in businesses that really don't focus on unlocking that access to people who can't afford to pay in cash. But it's like we revisit that debate all the time because you can build really valuable companies in the cash pay ecosystem. And so it's like, yes, this is our thesis, but we also have a fiduciary responsibility to our limited partners of generating the best possible returns. And maybe some really attractive returns can come from businesses that are in cash pay.
Yeah, I almost think that, I hope not overly optimistic once again, there's a theme with me, but that those are kind of byproducts of being in, we try to really simplify things and say, is it a really big market? Is it a really big problem that people are solving? And is there willingness to pay? Like, does someone care? And if you have those things and you're able to really show that there's an opportunity to do something way better than the status quo, then the payer coverage should follow. The consumer interest, I mean, it's so bad that that should follow. And then down the road, if those things are there, the investors, we all know there's way too much capital on the sidelines than there probably needs to be. So the money's there, the investors are there, they're looking for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen all at once necessarily, I think is part of what Naveed is saying, right? Yeah. So even Maven, for example, again, started off D2C. We are investors in a company called Summer Health in the pediatric space, which was also cash pay D2C. They have gotten flooded with inbound from actual payer plans and Medicaid plans because of what they're able to do and building a delightful product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the theme of the last couple of questions I've been asking has been integration, healthcare integration. Holly, you know this question is coming. General Catalyst bought a health system.
Asterisk,
Wait, I didn't hear about
asterisk,
that.
asterisk. In
Agreed
process of,
to buy.
Yes, has announced plans to
Yes,
acquire.
Yes, the agreement was 6 months ago,
had no
about
idea,
thereabouts, 5.5. Because you are representing the only VC firm on the stage to agree to buy a health system. I'm sure there's not much you can say about how it's going in terms of the progress, but tell us a little bit about what's going on inside the room in terms of what what the firm hopes to achieve. We're talking about all of these siloed pieces. The idea here is a less siloed, system.
Yeah, so there's only so much I can share. This is an active acquisition process, and so there's only so much I can share from a confidentiality perspective until the planned acquisition closes, should it close. But I can certainly share a bit around, the thesis for why. As we built out our health assurance, kind of view of the world, we always had this concept of radical collaboration at the core. So our belief was that you can't just go out and build companies that are looking to completely disrupt or displace the incumbents, so our health systems and our payers, but rather you have to focus on building companies that are going to make the incumbents better, so that they can free up resource to do what they do best, which is delivering really high quality care at the lowest cost of care delivery and underwrite that delivery of care. And so we've, over the last kind of 4 years, built out 22 health system partnerships where we're effectively their strategic innovation arm. And this represents close to 15% of care delivery in our country.
And those, the 22, are those international?
So 3 are international, all of the rest are in the US. So we have one partner in Canada, one partner in the UK, and one partner in Israel. The rest are domestic. And through that work, we've really been trying to understand what are the key transformation priorities for these systems over the short to medium term, and how can we help them get there faster, more effectively, and more efficiently. And through this work, we've really been creating this transformation playbook around 7 core pillars. And we've been working highly collaboratively with these systems on these areas of transformation. But the reality is at the end of the day, budgets may be fragmented. There's certainly a lot of stakeholders are involved, so we can make recommendations and make progress, but there's only so much we can do from an actual implementation perspective. And so that led to, the idea of, so as we think about ourselves internally, we think of ourselves as investors, partners, and now as operators. We recruited in Mark Harrison about 18 months ago to lead these efforts. He most recently ran Intermountain Health, one of the most successful health systems in our country in terms of the shift to value-based care. And so with him, we decided we really wanted to be able to put this transformation playbook into practice, and that is what led to the search for a potential health system that we could acquire that had a payer attached to it, which is important from an insights perspective. And and so we'll have a lot more to talk about should that acquisition close, but that's some of the
How important was that payer piece? You mentioned that being important, I imagine, for outcomes and other reasons, but.
Yeah, and it's a small plan, but it was a part of the criteria set. But the whole thing was around collaboration. I mean, one thing that we've learned through this partnership work is because we'll have these innovation days with our health systems where we'll go really deep on one transformation area, whether that's consumer empowerment, the hybrid care continuum, the shift to value, workforce transformation. And we'll have a handful of our portfolio companies that are building in that thesis area, spend time with the members of the leadership team that focus on that area. And it's been incredible to see how our portfolio companies have proactively started to engage with each other and integrate their solutions and jointly take something to market so that there's a single product voice, a single implementation process, and a sort of single pricing model that is, sort of collaboration unlike we've ever seen before. So incredibly hopeful for how that could accelerate transformation, accelerate, commercial sales cycles and the like.
And the health system is Suma Health in Ohio. I don't know if
Akron,
we mentioned
Ohio,
that,
yeah.
but yes.
Just one quick correction.
Yeah.
Beyond this stage and the three of us, I think it's the only time a venture capitalist firm has acquired
Correct.
a health system in
Yes.
maybe the universe.
Yes, I believe
At least
that
it's
is
planned.
this one.
Asterisk.
Planning.
Planning to announce the intent.
Yes, this
I love it.
universe. I really want to hear from you on this question, but I want to hear from both of you as well. Many health systems, as I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar, tend to believe, think, or act as if the EHR is the sole source of innovation. What's your answer to that? How do your investments reflect that?
I don't know what health systems you're talking to. Most health systems hate their EHR, but to your point, it is such a burden to switch EHRs. It is such a massive undertaking to, train your staff on it that the innovation needs to come from the EHR, which is probably more of what you're hearing. That being said, I think the limitations of that have been really stretched to the extreme lately. And so I've personally started to see a lot more openness from health systems, especially in this kind of AI craze that we're in, to seeing what else is out there, and lots of tools that are being built, not necessarily through the EHR, but finding their own kind of innovative ways to quote unquote integrate with EHR, even in sort of hacky ways. And at the end of the day, it's getting the job done. So I think I'm seeing health systems more open to in and around, less open to switching, because that sucks for any system, any provider. They'll tell you their own PTSD stories about EHRs.
So the companies you're investing in then are in and around building on top of
We have
next to.
We have all of the above. We have companies that are building data lake infrastructures to help with the interoperability. We have companies that are building entirely outside of EHRs. We have ones that are building on top. But the EHRs themselves are opening up a little bit more as well now. So there's a bit more. It's more table stakes to have that integration with EHR than it was 5 and 10 years ago. But I'm curious what you all are seeing.
Yeah, I mean, and it is where the highest volume of structured data lives today. And so, that is a significant point, and therefore, the feeling is that if I'm going to be investing in other pieces of technology, it certainly should at least integrate with or speak to what is the largest set of structured data. As we are seeing different kinds of data assets emerge, I think that the view of the HR will suddenly become, a bit like what we've seen in the kind of HR space in terms of applicant tracking systems, right? There's only so much that the EHR can do, and it has sometimes been viewed as I don't want to use the dumb database, because it is just a database where the data lives. But as, again, these other really potentially just, exciting platforms emerge that are pulling in new kinds of data sets from an AI perspective, like that
Are you thinking of
power
anything in
shift
particular?
could change.
Any types of data sets in particular you're thinking about?
No,
Imaging maybe is one.
yeah, no, I mean, that's one. Yeah, it's a fair question. There are some that, for example, there are companies working on in real time building, sort of marketplaces that can provide liquidity for the first time to data that hasn't been accessed before. So I think there will be more on that topic shortly.
The whole world of data is under a microscope now that you've got generative AI and LLMs. Going back to your question, just from what we see, I mean, this was a little while ago, but there was a physician I used to work with in one of our companies who said, if you ever committed a crime and wanted to bury something so nobody found it, PDF it and put it in your EHR, and you're good. And that used to be very true. I think less so today. We've gotten way better, but to your point, I mean, it has been historically like pretty much a word processor, and I know that'll be offensive to some people, but as a generalization, a data repository and sort of a commodity. And to the point about innovation, I do think health system folks out there, it's probably hard to argue that there's not hope, at least, that everyone would hope that the EHR would be the source of innovation. If I had to bet against, I'd bet against it if I had to make a bet. But there's just so much point solution fatigue if that's not the case. And I mean, there's so much waste as well, just like so many companies integrating. The whole thing is, it's just so inefficient, right? Because you could select, like, unlike other industries or other things that we purchase in outside of healthcare, you could go through a process, identify a solution. It could be great. Then you integrate it, which is just a ton of resources for these health systems in terms of their technology departments and data integration and security and everything. You go live, it's great, and then, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising 2 years later something better comes along.
Yeah.
Well, like, to rip that out is just, I mean, to go through that again, you're like, oh my God, I just went through that. And people might, people in the IT department might like die. It's like so labor intensive.
Well, and the providers, I think, is a big part of it, right? Because as has been discussed here, that is fundamentally what it comes down to. You might get ITs to sign off on it, but if you can't get your providers using it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And that's why we end up with single points of failure in healthcare.
Yeah.
Like we saw it change.
Yes.
You have these just like incredible dependencies from an infrastructure perspective because the commercial, the sales cycles are so long. So by the time you actually have it implemented and actually people use it, it's been like 6 years. And you're like, okay, well, we're finally at the point where people are using it. So we're just going to use it for a really long time. And that's how these single points of failure occur. And that's not a good place to be from an overall innovation ecosystem perspective.
And we've settled for mediocrity in such a big way because it's so hard to switch these things out once you get, and if you're getting a B-, maybe that's fine. When, if it was easier to replace it, you could go for an A.
Have you considered buying a health system?
Not yet. We're waiting to see how this happens. It's got to close first. No, but it's bold. I like it. First time in the universe.
Pretty cool.
So we've got about 11 and a half minutes. Usually at the 10-minute mark, I ask people to submit their questions for Q&A, but we have a smart audience here, and I imagine quite a few smart questions. I also see some hands already going up, so I think I'm gonna go to Q&A if that works for you all. I saw you first, sir, yes?
You had very little discussion of experimental therapeutics and investing in experimental therapeutics. And the unfortunate aspect of that is the NIH gives us a lot of money to invest in new therapeutic targets and new molecules. Now, I know that that's a highly risky investment, and that's why you don't do it. So my question for you is, what policy changes would you like to see so that this great infrastructure that we have that's generating so many good molecules, patents, and potential therapeutic breakthroughs really get advanced?
Well, we do invest in that area, so up to, yeah.
All today we talked about, you mentioned once, and it's the drug abuse.
That's fair. We didn't.
Yeah, I don't write about biotech, which is my excuse.
Yeah.
Not a very good one. Fair. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so we over the last couple of years have really been building out, our thesis areas, and my partner Elena is exceptional, PhD in computational biology and very thesis driven, and has probably made, 25 investments since she joined. From an overall risk profile perspective, we have, as we think about capital allocation as venture capitalists, and what we tell our LPs that we do, we can take science risk up to 20% of our healthcare capital, but that is still a very significant amount, because to your point, I mean, we're the advancements are incredible, and it's not just the actual drug discovery. And I should mention that the chair of our health assurance fund is Ken Frazier, who ran Merck for a very long time, and so very, very tied into that ecosystem. And we're excited. We're actively investing, and we're going to be investing a lot more. And what I'm most excited about is how we can focus on backing first of their kind platforms that bridge the innovative care delivery that some of our companies are creating and the innovative therapeutics. So especially as I think about behavioral health and like how can we take the pipeline of incredible work that some of our companies are focused on in the therapeutics landscape, and our incredibly innovative care delivery companies that are bringing new models of care into different segments of behavioral health, and have a very seamless new platform.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned behavioral health, because that was one question I actually did want to ask that we didn't get to. I see you. Yeah, I have the same question for all of you as I did for MSK. How do you see these solutions as integrating back into the healthcare system as a whole? Where are we at with behavioral health in terms of its evolution? And perhaps what lessons can we learn from the downfall of companies like Dun or Cerebral? Just packing a lot into one question there, but.
I'm happy to go. I mean, I think there's still a lot untapped in behavioral health, which is a big category. So when people think behavioral health, they often just think, of talk therapy. There's a lot more to it. We recently invested in a company in the autism space, and there is a lot of innovation that, that is happening there that we're excited about. I think there are lessons to be learned from some of the employer-facing platforms in the behavioral health space, but there's a large amount outside of that. So severe mental illness, PTSD. Again, we look toward outcomes ultimately, and we're looking at novel solutions. We also invest, to the gentleman's earlier question, heavily in biotech. It's a big focus area for Lux, and so we look at things, outside behavioral health, but more broadly in neuro, in CNS, and things like that, on the therapeutic side, on the drug discovery side, and on the care delivery side. So I think a lot of people saw behavioral health as maybe oversaturated during COVID because frankly, we were all having a mental health crisis during that time, and it was one of the lower hanging fruits for telehealth. It's a conversation, you move the conversation online. What we're excited about are actually novel ways of delivering care that are not just more efficient, but actually more effective. So whether that's through biomarkers, whether that's through leveraging community health workers, different types of workers, et cetera, I think there's still a lot more to be done. Oh, and Cerebral and Dun. That's a lot of lessons to be learned there. I think ultimately you have to remember when you're investing in health tech, you're investing in human lives, and what might look like skyrocketing growth on the revenue side, it does not necessarily correlate with better outcomes and what's better for humanity. And I think that's evident now. It's not just about those companies being prosecuted. It's about ultimately what they did to human lives. So that's something that we try to keep an eye out for at the earliest days.
It's such a broad category, and so important, so I don't want to be repetitive. Going back to, it does feel like we're really close if we can get comfortable on the safety side of it, which I don't know. But if we can, really close to having like a virtual therapist with the way that these LLMs, how sophisticated they can be. And I was...
like a chatbot based?
Yeah, to the point where I was on a flight just serendipitously on the way here, and was talking to the gentleman next to me, and he asked me, how far away do you think we are from a human falling in love with a bot, and like that bot being their partner? And his theory was under a year, which is kind of scary to think about. But if that can happen, then you could probably put guardrails in place to have some form of.
It's definitely been tried.
Well, there was a whole movie on that, right? So.
Yeah, and I mean, just to that point, we've, in behavioral health, in recent years, there's been a tremendous amount of investment into and focus on access. How do people get the care, that they need when they need it, and they know that they need it, and they are opting into receiving that care? We are now entering the wave of but how do you most effectively engage the populations who need the care the most and may be opting out? And so to your point, I am all ears to hearing about any kind of solution that may engage with somebody who would otherwise not engage with the care that is needed, because the crisis is tremendous. And so whether it's, recently met with a company that's building a cat named Callie that is, engaging with people, and there's a certain demographic that wants, that's how they want to engage. And so that is great. And, it's just figuring out how do you most effectively triage what is now a compounding set of signals that we are seeing. I think we are becoming pretty good at seeing signals, identifying those signals, but there's a big, especially as we think about sort of at the adolescent landscape, but then what? So we have all these signals from social media, but no one actually wants to kind of touch the signal and be the real triage layer and the care coordination layer. And there's an amazing opportunity there. We just have to figure out how to most effectively build it.
Well, I mean, one thing that's tremendously encouraging is that we've gotten through largely, and if you on a relative basis, the stigma of even seeking behavioral health or saying that you're seeking behavioral health. So that's a step that is tremendous, I think. But now we're not conditioned to how to get it, what to do, right? If you're we almost need education that says, here's how you see a therapist, here's what you should do, here's what you should do in between visits. I know people are doing that, but not enough.
And it's starting earlier and earlier. So we're investors in a company called Daybreak Health, which is working with K through 12 schools to introduce that. And there are tailwinds where, again, I think in large part due to COVID, a lot of these states are actually providing funding to schools to provide that care.
And the last thing I'll say about that is just so much we can do to measure how effective it is.
Yeah.
Right? Am I getting an 8 out of 10 after 6 months, or a 2 out of 10? I mean, many times you just don't know because something's better than nothing.
Right. We have PHQ-9, he's got 7. I promised I would do more questions, so I apologize for pivoting back here. Yes, sir. Yes, you.
Hi, Daniel Kraft, also an Aspen Fellow and Health Investor. What's your take on the opportunity and lessons of failures in digital therapeutics, which include mental health applications? Many solutions are out there, but clinicians aren't using them or prescribing them. So what's the future in that realm?
A lot of lessons to be learned. It's been a tumultuous time for digital therapeutics. I think it kind of goes back to a question that you've heard come up, or a criteria, which is, ultimately engagement and who pays. I guess 2 criteria. So in this case, providers and the sort of efficacy attached to these digital therapeutics did not necessarily pass the sniff test when it was, it might have worked in clinical trials. How well was it working in clinic? How often was it being replicated? And what were patients and providers kind of orienting towards? And so I think it was a very quick downfall from there. You saw companies that were valued very highly and literally were sold for parts, which is sad, because I do think that there is actually some promise still in digital therapeutics. And it may not be in the use cases that we originally saw, but I think it'll perhaps rise as a phoenix from those ashes. There will be some interesting use cases, but it's certainly not an area I would say people are particularly bullish on right now.
Yeah, we don't invest directly there, but I guess sort of gets gray between, is it prescribed or referred? And certainly we're doing things where it's referrals. It's, even though we don't invest in it, it's hard to see a world where there's not going to be more of that.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to check on, are there opportunities for rural health care and investments? I'm on the Aspen Valley Hospital, and there's a lot of pressure on rural healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we invest in every stage, and part of our strategy is working with incredible entrepreneurs and building companies, and one of those is a company called Homeward Health that we've built alongside Jenny Schneider. She was most recently the president and chief medical officer of Livongo, but it is focused exclusively on rural health care and how do you take best-in-class virtual specialty care and integrate it into where there are just significant healthcare deserts. And so she's from one of the zip codes that is a healthcare desert, and it's been her life's work. And especially we were just talking about behavioral. I mean, the behavioral crisis in rural America is acute. And so there are many dynamics, and to make sure that the coverage is really there, and that the provider network is of the quality when there are many zip codes in those areas where the decline from a workforce perspective is most acute, and that's why we have to leverage a hybrid care model, and that's what Homeward is all about.
I'm going to take one more. Yes, I saw you earlier. Yes. He asked if they could talk about what they're doing in remote patient monitoring.
Thank you. As a way of really helping bend the cost curve down with readmissions and stuff.
We haven't invested directly in it. We've looked at it a ton. I think that the problem we saw historically was that there was a new CPT code or CPT codes, and then all these companies kind of flooded to help enable that. But I think it's really what we saw and learned, at least in our experience, is that the logistics, to do it the right way, and it's the hard way, to build a foundation so that the logistics, and you can do it efficiently and at scale, is really hard. And so a lot of those, you could get to this point as a new company, and then you start to stall out. We are seeing companies that are having a lot more success and having it be integrated in different ways. The data opportunity we've talked about is tremendously helpful.
I have to apologize. I just realized the clock's going the wrong way, so
I know.
we are out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I'm sure there was more we could have gotten to, but thank you so much.
Bye.